Borsalino was born 58 years ago in the North Blue. We only have one picture of him as a kid, but it tells us a decent amount. He's shown reading and studying, and being happy while doing it, and as shown by him having a lamp next to him, he'd even study into the nighttime. We of course don't know what type of books he was interested in, but this gives us a small glimpse into his childhood that might become relevant in the future. Years later, when he was 26, he decided to join the Marines for an unknown reason. He was assigned to work under Dr. Vegapunk, the smartest man alive, and one day, when they were tasked with taking down some bears that were attacking a local village, they found that a young boy named Sentomaru had beaten the bears and demanded that Vegapunk hire him, and he obliged, asking him if he wanted to be his bodyguard. But Sentomaru was clueless about how to protect Vegapunk, so went to Borsalino and asked him to teach him. So, he took him on as his student. Around this time, he ate a devil fruit that turned his body into light itself. It was incredibly powerful, but Borsalino enjoyed using it for simpler things, like performing light shows for Vegapunk and Sentomaru, but eventually, he had to leave those two. With Sentomaru fully trained up to protect Vegapunk, he didn't need to be there anymore, so returned to his other duties. After a few years, he rose to the rank of Vice Admiral, and one day, he was informed of the rising power of the Sun Pirates, led by Fisher Tiger, and also that the fishman Arlong was causing problems as well. Soon after, the Marines ambushed Tiger and killed him, with Arlong attacking them in revenge immediately. Borsalino was there and easily took him down and brought him in for interrogation. With Borsalino performing his duties without any issues like this, he soon got promoted to the rank of Admiral and was given the name Kizaru, meaning Yellow Monkey, probably a play on his carefree and playful nature. Years passed, and his latest duty brought him back to his old friends. He was ordered to meet with Vegapunk and preside over the situation of Kuma and the world government. One of the 5 elders, Saint J. Garcia Saturn, spoke to Kuma and Vegapunk through a transponder snail, and Kizaru's job was just to stand there while they negotiated. He intervened in the middle of the conversation, agreeing with the elder's suggestions, which pissed off Vegapunk. Earlier, he was already getting annoyed at Kizaru being there on government business, but Kizaru responded that he was just doing his job, and that was what everything boiled down to. For some unknown reason, his job was always his #1 priority, even if it came in between him and his friends, and he stood there, while Kuma agreed to sign over his entire life to the government, which upset Kizaru, but he couldn't bring himself to stand up to the government and their horrible ways. But as a consolation, Kuma accepted his fate happily, on the condition that they save his daughter's life, and they accepted. So Kizaru would spend the next 6 months with all of them, while Kuma's daughter Bonnie was cured of her illness, and they all enjoyed that time, eating and dancing together. But that would come to an end, and Kuma was turned into a shell of his former self. Kizaru once again left his friends and returned to his duties, when one day he was at Marine HQ with Fleet Admiral Sengoku, and they received a call about a young pirate named Monkey D. Luffy punching a celestial dragon. As per the protocol, if a celestial dragon was assaulted, it was required by law that an admiral take a fleet to kill whoever did it, and Kizaru volunteered, saying he wouldn't take long. He made quite the entrance, being shot into Sabaody on a cannonball. He tried calling up Sentomaru, who was also on the island at the time, but it wasn't working. While he was trying, a pirate shot him right in the head, but because of his devil fruit, the bullet went right through him, and without a care in the world, he asked the same pirate if he knew where Sentomaru was, but they ran away screaming. So Kizaru nonchalantly lifted his leg up and shot a huge beam of light at them, completely destroying one of the gigantic trees on the island. His soldiers told him he went too far, and he casually agreed, then went back to his search for Sentomaru, asking another pirate, Captain Hawkins. He said he didn't know him, so Kizaru said if he couldn't find him, he'd have some time on his hands, and couldn't ignore the pirate with a huge bounty in front of him, and he decided to play around, showing this new rookie how things were at the highest level. He asked Hawkins if he'd ever been kicked at the speed of light, then demonstrated, but Hawkins used his devil fruit to transfer the damage to someone else, which confused Kizaru, but they were interrupted by one of Kuma's clones throwing another rookie at his feet. He wasn't surprised to see the pacifista, since he'd seen their production from the start, so instead turned his focus to the pirates. He kicked one through multiple buildings, then flashed light in Hawkins' eyes, mocking the pirates by calling them scary, then effortlessly beating them. He was about to finish Hawkins off, but was interrupted by another rookie, who used his fruit to cut Kizaru's body in half and cause it to explode. He thought he beat Kizaru, but his body easily reformed, and he said that surprised him. But then he used his fruit to instantly make his way over to the pirate and slam him through a building. He was just playing with all these rookies. He knew for a fact none of them had hockey, so he didn't even have to defend himself, so took this chance to toy with the pirates, but he was interrupted by a call. Sentomaru finally got through to him, and apparently Kizaru had been using the wrong snail before, which Sentomaru said he told him, but I guess bro was just chilling too hard to care. Sentomaru then said that they found all the culprits of the celestial dragon attack, Luffy, Captain Kidd, and Trafalgar Law, and he asked which one Kizaru would go after first, and he chose the Straw Hat Pirates, probably because they'd been making headlines recently for what they did at Eni's lobby, and even though Kizaru was relaxed, he was very good at his job, and wanted to take out any potentially dangerous pirates as soon as possible, and Luffy was the main candidate. He confronted the crew soon after and found that Sentomaru was already fighting them. He stood over Zoro, the vice captain, who was already gravely injured, and he was glad to take the chance to finish him while he was weak, since he knew the danger he would pose in the future. He charged up a powerful beam at the bottom of his foot and raised it towards Zoro, but right when he was about to fire, his leg was kicked away by the former vice captain of the Roger Pirates, Silver's Rayleigh. Kizaru wasn't surprised to see him. He knew he was laying low on the island, but asked if that was the right time to come out of hiding, but Rayleigh just replied that it was a Straw Hat's era, and he wouldn't let him take them out when they weren't ready. This just confirmed Kizaru's hunch. Out of every crew on Sabaody, he chose to take this one seriously, and that intuition was proven right by one of the most legendary pirates alive personally protecting them. Kizaru's knowledge and intelligence isn't talked about enough, and I think the clues of him constantly studying in his childhood are shown here. We think of Akainu as the one who heavily researches pirates like Ace during the war, but it seems like Kizaru keeps up to date with everything as well. To do the best job he can with his position as admiral, Luffy screamed out to his crew that they weren't strong enough to defeat Sentomaru, the pacifista, and Kizaru, so he ordered them to run. Kizaru was impressed by the admission and knowing that Luffy was making his job harder. He tried to go after them, but was once again stopped by Rayleigh. He was using a sword, and Kizaru knew he had to get serious. If he was sliced in half this time, that would be the end. So he summoned a sword of his own out of light and clashed with Rayleigh. Just the sheer power of the former vice captain of the Roger Pirates caused Kizaru to get a cut on his face, which emphasized the situation he was in. After they fought for a while, the real Kuma appeared and caused one of the Straw Hats to disappear. He continued doing the same to the other members, but stopped for a moment and went over to Rayleigh in the middle of his fight with Kizaru. He whispered something to Rayleigh, and Kizaru demanded to know what he said, but he refused to tell him. He proceeded to make every other Straw Hat disappear, which confused Kizaru and everyone else that was there. But what Kizaru did know was that whatever he did would end up being a problem. Kizaru proceeded to clean up the rest of Sabaody, which was still in chaos, capturing 500 pirates, but still he'd failed his mission. He didn't capture Luffy or even Law or Kid, so he had nothing to show for the furious celestial dragons. But there were even more pressing matters at hand, since a war was brewing. Portgas the Ace had been captured, and Whitebeard was expected to attack when Ace was brought in for execution, so Goku ordered anyone with even the slightest strength in the Marines to all gather in Marineford, of course including Kizaru. He sat there with his fellow Marines, waiting for the attack, and it soon came. Whitebeard arrived, and the war began. At first, all three admirals kept their position, but soon enough Kizaru wanted to test his power against Whitebeard, and shot some beams at him, but they were all blocked by Whitebeard's 1st Division commander Marco. Kizaru noted the special nature of his fruit, and Marco charged him. Kizaru fired beams at him again, but he was able to absorb all of them and close the distance, throwing a kick at Kizaru, but he blocked it, saying it still hurt, but Marco called his bluff, and Kizaru blasted him away. Later on, Luffy arrived at the war, and Kizaru was surprised to see him again so soon, and asked Sengoku if they should execute Luffy and the other new arrivals, and he was granted permission. So when Luffy charged forward, Kizaru pointed a beam at him, saying he let him escape at Sabaody. The celestial dragons had been demanding his death, so that was a bonus of killing him right here, but as he fired, Luffy was launched out of the way by his ally Emporio Vankov, so he went on to fight some Whitebeard pirates instead. But when Luffy got too close to rescuing Ace, Kizaru said he needed to send him back to the starting line, so kicked him away. But he couldn't pursue him as he was charged by some Whitebeard pirates. He was able to get away from the action for just enough time to join the other admirals in stopping a gigantic attack from Whitebeard that threatened to destroy Navy HQ entirely. Later, Luffy once again made his way forward, and this time confronted all three admirals. Kizaru just noted that he was pretty scary for a kid, though knowing him, this was probably sarcasm. Luffy was angry and stubbornly attacked all three of them, though he didn't have any success since all three of them were Logias, so Kizaru raised his leg and called Luffy slow, and shot him all the way back once again. Kizaru at this point was just having some fun with Luffy. He could have killed him multiple times if he chose, but he instead just shot him backwards to make his mission to rescue Ace harder. This is different from Sabaody, where Kizaru did want to kill Luffy and his crew. What changed was related to Kuma. Kizaru must have been curious about why Kuma chose to save Luffy. Since he knew everything about Kuma's past, he probably wanted to see why Kuma saved Luffy in particular, when he'd never done anything like that to disobey the Navy before then, so he was curious to find out the reason for that. His inquisitive and curious mind that he's had ever since his childhood is shown here, even if it's subtle, and contrast between someone like Akainu, who if he got the same chance as Kizaru did, definitely would have killed Luffy instead of just pushing him back. This is shown again when he walked over to Luffy and started giving him advice, saying that it would take more than just effort to save someone. Then he kicked the unconscious Luffy directly into Whitebeard's arm, arms. He then went back to fighting other pirates, but soon after, Whitebeard's injuries and illness caught up to him, and he collapsed. Marco lunged in to protect him, but he wasn't defending himself, and Kizaru fired 2 beams right through his chest, but Marco started to regenerate, but Kizaru of course knew this, so coordinated with the Vice Admiral and had him put sea cuff stones on Marco to disable the use of his Devil Fruit, and Kizaru shot him through the chest again. He then went for Luffy again, since he was just about to rescue his brother, but was stopped by Whitebeard. He responded by shooting Whitebeard with a beam, then turned towards Luffy, who was just about to free Ace from his chains, but with perfect precision, shot right through the key. Apart from straight up killing him, Kizaru really did every single thing he could to prevent Luffy from rescuing Ace, which shows he'll always prioritize his job, but he'll bend the rules as much as he can. So technically, he does his duty, but he'll leave enough room for his own interests and agendas too. And ultimately, the Navy won the war in the end, with the Kainu killing Ace, but Luffy was still alive, and Trafalgar Law had come to rescue him. Kizaru saw this and said he'd get him back, since he was another one that got away from him on Sabaody. But when he was about to attack, a young marine yelled out above all the noise of the war, making Kizaru pause. He said that they had achieved their goal, and they should stop the war, but the Kainu didn't like that and was about to kill him. But just then, the Emperor Red-Haired Shanks intervened. Kizaru went back to what he was doing and aimed a beam at Lost Submarine, but Shanks' vice captain Ben Beckman aimed his gun at him, and Kizaru put his hands up, sarcastically acting afraid. But he of course wasn't afraid, and when he got the chance, shot hundreds of beams at Lost Submarine, but they were narrowly able to escape. And as Kizaru said, if they were still alive after that, they'd have to give up, and just say they got lucky. But did they get lucky? Did Kizaru purposely miss the submarine to keep Luffy alive like he'd been doing the whole war? Or did he say, I'll try and hit it, and if fate is on Luffy's side, he'll live, and if not, I'll have finished my job anyway, so it's all good. Either one of those options are possible, so you can decide for yourself. And that's where the war ended. 2 years passed and a lot happened. He was the only one of the original 3 admirals to remain, with Aokiji leaving the navy and Akainu being promoted to fleet admiral. So 2 new admirals, Green Bull and Fujitoro, were instated. Kizaru continued to follow his orders as per usual, when one day he was at Navy HQ with Akainu, and they got the news that Big Mom was headed to Wano to meet Kaido, and Kizaru immediately volunteered to fight them. But Akainu didn't let him, saying there was another unknown military force in Wano, so Kizaru stayed in HQ and just discussed recent events with Akainu, but he was desperate to get involved with one of them, and he would get his chance, but in possibly one of the worst ways. He was told that his friend Vegapunk was researching the Void Sentry, a crime punishable by death, and he was ordered to go to Egghead with the fleet and make sure Vegapunk didn't leave alive. He was told that Vegapunk also allied with the Straw Hats, and he said he wouldn't let any of them escape easily. He went back into the ship and met with St. J. Garcia's Saturn, who had come along as well. He asked if he ever met Vegapunk, besides that call they had a few years before, and he said he did, a long time ago. Soon after, they arrived at Egghead, and Kizaru immediately fired at the defenses, and Sentomaru called him, angry that he did so. Kizaru told Sentomaru that his resistance to their attack wasn't making this easy for him, and asked him to surrender, but Sentomaru refused and said they'd be ready if he fired on them again, and Kizaru replied that he was absolutely terrified. Sentomaru continued, saying the defenses were based on Vegapunk's study of Kizaru's Devil Fruit, and now that things came full circle, he couldn't believe he was now there to kill Vegapunk, but Kizaru simply responded that it was his own choice to research the Void Sentry, and he couldn't save him from the consequences of that, and he was just a cog in the machine. He then changed topic and said that everything they broke on the island would be a loss to the Navy, and assumed that the assassins they sent in earlier failed, and Sentomaru said they were stopped by the Straw Hats. The Straw Hats were there, thwarting their plans, making Kizaru's job harder. Yet again, their fate seemed to be crossed, but Kizaru had to deal with it, since he chose to let Luffy live all those times at Marineford. Later, Kizaru was talking to Saturn, and was asked if he could get into the laser defense system since he was made out of light, and he said he was sure he could, but he had to deal with Sentomaru first. Saturn told him to just fly past him, but interestingly, Kizaru said that would be an insult to Sentomaru. He put his life on the line, defying the world government and defending the island, so he insisted on taking him down himself. This was a form of respect, combined with Kizaru's unwavering commitment to his duties, and so he wasted no time and blasted himself right towards Sentomaru. He went in for a powerful kick, but it was blocked. He went in for another kick, then blasted light at Sentomaru, telling him to surrender, but he dodged, saying he gave his word to Luffy that he'd protect the island. Kizaru asked when he'd gotten close to a pirate like Luffy, but he simply said that he owed Vegapunk his life, and he would take any side that allowed him to escape. He swung at Kizaru, but he evaded everything, and reminisced on the first time him and Vegapunk found Sentomaru, and reminded him that he was the one that taught him. Sentomaru lunged at him again, but he blocked it, saying he wouldn't be able to get through his guard, and blasted him into the ground. He then turned his attention to the laser barrier, barrier, saying meeting the Straw Hats again would be nostalgic, and he flew up past the barrier. He then listed out all the things he had to make sure didn't get destroyed, saying he wished he could add his old friends to that list, but sadly, his duty would come first. In this situation, there was no wiggle room where his friends could be spared, and he solemnly said that Vegapunk's elimination was the top priority. He then spotted the Straw Hats trying to escape, and the captain himself came to confront Kizaru, kicking him. He blocked and called Luffy cheeky, but Luffy reminded him that they weren't the same as they were 2 years before. Luffy then transformed and started trading blows with Kizaru, and he was impressed, saying Luffy truly was the man who had taken down Kaido, but asked why he would protect Vegapunk, but Luffy just replied asking why he wanted to kill Vegapunk. Kizaru flew up into the sky and replied that he didn't want to kill Vegapunk, he'd known him for a long time, but this was his duty, and he told Luffy to not get in the way, and he kicked him right into Vegapunk's robot who was carrying the Straw Hats away, causing it to explode. He then went up to Bonnie, telling her she'd grown. He told her he was on orders to kill Vegapunk and told her not to get in the way, but she replied that she was now after someone else and tried to attack him, but he easily dodged, and as he was about to hit her with a counterattack, he begged her not to make him kill more of his old friends than he needed to, and he fired his attack, but made sure that it wasn't strong enough to kill her, but just a warning. He then flew away and appeared right in front of Vegapunk. He told him to please understand that this mission wasn't easy for him, and he tried to make it quick. But Kizaru had more to worry about than his own personal feelings, as Luffy transformed into a giant version of himself and picked up Kizaru like he was a toy. This actually surprised the normally calm Kizaru, and he only got more confused as Luffy started spinning him around like a Beyblade, and all Kizaru could do was sarcastically ask him to be gentle with him, as Luffy threw him as far as he could. He was launched off the island, almost landing in the ocean, which would have been certain death, but Kizaru saved himself just in time, launching himself back towards the island, splitting himself into many parts. He then made a light sword and started swinging at Luffy. He tried to respond, but all the clones confused him, until a bunch of them lined up in a row and Luffy stomped them, convinced he got the real one too. But during this, Kizaru snuck away and confronted the other Straw Hats, picking up Usopp by the neck, but Kizaru was only interested in Vegapunk, who'd taken the chance to escape. Kizaru spotted him and charged up a finger beam, but Luffy got in the way and swallowed it, absorbing all the damage. Kizaru started getting tired and said he had a job to do, and told Luffy he couldn't finish it if they just kept playing around. Then he shot himself away to get the Vegapunk, but Luffy followed close behind, but they were briefly distracted as Saturn summoned himself to the island. Kizaru continued and tried to fire on Vegapunk, but Luffy got ready to punch him, so he shot at him with a laser, which spun Luffy around, but he threw the punch and landed cleanly on Kizaru, sending him flying down, crashing into a building. Kizaru held his head, trying to recover from the attack, as Saturn said that he never failed to execute his orders like this before, and Kizaru apologized, saying he had no excuse, and he had to take some time to recover. As he lay there, he thought of his friends. He chose his job over his friends, but he even failed at that. He was at an all-time low. Everything went wrong. His friends would be killed, and he would gain nothing from it. He sat up, and he watched his Kuma punch Saturn, an unprecedented situation, one of the 5 elders being attacked, and he held his head, saying it was over. But then he stood up, resolving himself to see his duty out to the end. He wanted to put the Straw Hats to the test, to see how far they really grew since Sabaody, and he kicked Frankie back after he fired on Saturn. He then said that now that Kuma was there, it was time to put an end to things, and Vegapunk asked if he had no heart, but he clearly did, as he said he wished he brought some darker sunglasses so they could hide all the emotions he was feeling in that moment. Saturn then said that him and Kizaru would stay on the island while the rest of the fleet would fire at it, knowing they could survive. He planned to destroy Egghead entirely, and Kizaru agreed to the plan. This meant none of his friends would survive, but this was his mission, and he was in too deep now. He had made his choice, and he had to follow it to his conclusion. Vegapunk begged Kizaru not to destroy the island and all his research, but as Kizaru said, he was just a cog in the machine, and the choice wasn't up to him. He then went to attack a group of escaping Straw Hats, knocking them back down to prevent them from leaving the island. Saturn then finally had enough of Vegapunk and stabbed him right through the chest, then ordered Kizaru to kill everyone else, and he followed his orders, firing at Kuma. But still, having his memories with them intact, said he'd kill Kuma and Bonnie in one slash so they wouldn't have to suffer, but Luffy appeared and punched him down to the ground. He held his head again, not just because of the pain, but all the confliction going on in his mind. His duty was all he had left though, so he returned, and prepared to shoot Bonnie, closing his eyes, not wanting to see it, but his laser was kicked away by Sanji. He opened his eyes wide in shock, and Bonnie was taken away. He said that he was really in trouble now. He'd done nothing but fail this whole mission, and he said his only chance to be redeemed was to bring back back the heads of both Luffy and Sanji, but Saren appeared and started fighting Luffy for him, so he knew, even if it was the last thing he wanted to do, he had no choice but to go for Vegapunk. He kicked Sanji, who was carrying Vegapunk, then shot through him with a laser. He collapsed, and Kizaru just looked back at him, trying not to show any of the emotions he was feeling. Sanji picked him up again and started running, and as Kizaru went to intercept them, he was again grabbed by Luffy, who said he wouldn't let him escape. But Kizaru wouldn't go down that easily, and shot at him with beams from his eyes, but Luffy swung his arms back and clapped Kizaru and Saturn together, then started tossing them like pizza dough, and then threw them away like frisbees, with Kizaru crashing into a Navy ship. He was down for the third time. The Marines on the ship asked if he was injured and to let them treat him, but he just covered his eyes and said that his wounds ran deep and to just let him rest already, and that's where Kizaru's story ends for now. Let me just say that after laying all that out, this day has been horrible for Kizaru. He's really going through it, and I can't wait to see where he goes. He's one of the most interesting plotlines going right now, and it's been hard to focus on because we got the entire Kuma and Bonnie backstories in all the same chapters, so it's been hard to really look at what Kizaru's been going through. But let me know, where do you think he goes? Will he continue to not waver on his marine duties, choosing it over everything? Will he switch sides and help his friends? Some might think it's too late, but I personally think it never is too late, and that could be really interesting. Or is this last panel really the truth? Is Kizaru really just tired after all this and done with everything? I don't think so, but we'll have to see.